Good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome to our webinar this week on Friday, the 17th of April. I trust you're all well and enjoying and looking forward to our session this week. And this week, I am pleased to announce and to introduce you to our guest speaker, Mr. Jeremy Myerson from WORKTECH Academy. Good morning, Jeremy.
Good morning.
And how are you this morning?
I'm top of the morning. Every day's like Groundhog Day, but what can we do?
Well, you've stolen part of my session now, because I was going to talk about that in the preamble. But before we get into the presentation, as per usual, I'd just like to ask if everybody can hear us. So I'll just have a little poll, and if you can let us know if you can hear both Jeremy and I'd be very grateful. And so far we have 100%, so which is fabulous. So a very good morning to you all, and thank you very much for joining us. What we're going to be doing this morning is as per normal, we're going to go through a set of questions I'm going to ask Jeremy, which is all the subject is around how we've bent the system so far. So as the title of the webinar suggests, we have completely bent the system out of shape, and it won't reform exactly. And we're going to be exploring what kinks will be left when we do actually return to work. And as I mentioned, Jeremy is joining me today. I appear to be wearing the same jumper. I didn't take this morning. I do have other clothes to wear, but Jeremy has very kindly put on a jacket and trousers, I believe, this morning. So thank you for that. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us, as we mentioned. I'd just like to recap on where we were at our last webinar. Mark Eltringham joined us from Insight Magazine, author and publisher. And for those that have missed it, that are interested, you can find a link for the download to watch that video, which is on our website. And I would encourage you to have a look at that if you do indeed have time. But where are we? And we all find ourselves in this very weird predicament. And Jeremy and I are going to talk about that in a few minutes. But just to recap, we're 1 week on again from where we were. We're now week 4, I believe, in our lockdown. And of course, we are faced everywhere we go in our daily lives. Our civil liberties, of course, have been restricted, and it's becoming incredibly frustrating for us. Wherever we go, of course, we're seeing visions like this. Everything is locked down, taped off. Bars and restaurants are closed. And of course, one doesn't need to talk about the economy. We know how the economy is suffering. And we hear it, of course, in different mediums across different platforms everywhere we go. And as Jeremy talked there, I mean, if you haven't seen the film, please do go and have a look at it. But Groundhog Day, it's I'm sure we've got a bit of time at the moment to go and watch that. But every day at the moment does seem to be a little bit samey. And as I talked about with Mark in our session just over a week ago, we do have this blurred line between what we do on a day-to-day basis and what we don't do on a day-to-day basis. So there's this blurred line between work and play as well. And just moving on, my computer's frozen. We've now had to live our life in a virtual way. So we have our virtual catch-ups, our virtual coffees, as I mentioned last week, Zoom calls, house party. Everything we do, of course, now is done via video chat. The personalization, the experiences that we crave for, as I mentioned, civil liberties now, of course, been restricted. So don't panic. Of course, it's still the session we're hearing from our colleagues in the government. And I'm going to just hand over to Jeremy now, and we're going to bring Jeremy in as part of this. So Jeremy, good morning and welcome again. And just tell me a little bit, if you don't mind, about your good self and, of course, the WORKTECH Academy.
So the WORKTECH Academy is a global knowledge network based around the WORKTECH conferences, which have been running since 2003, looking at the future of work and workplace. And what the Academy does is try and bridge the gap between the best academic and scientific thinking in the field and commercial practice. So we're really looking at how we're going to work tomorrow, and the current situation brings that into sharp relief. And I also combine this role as director of WORKTECH Academy with my long-term career as an academic and writer. I hold the Helen Hamlin Chair of Design at the Royal College of Art, and I'm also a visiting professorial fellow at the University of Oxford. So I'm kind of sitting on the not the fence, but at the intersection of academia and practice.
Where do you find the time?
Yeah, I've got plenty of time right now.
So, and how do people join up to the academy if they want to?
Yes, you can join as an individual member, or as a community member, or as a corporate member, or a partner. So we've got various stages of membership. Have a look at our website, www.worktechacademy.com. And this is a very interesting time to be thinking about the future of work. And even though the WorkTech events are currently paused, they'll come back, we hope, in the autumn. But we're putting a lot of our resources and
Perfect. Well, that leads us very nicely into some of the questions I've got to ask you then, Jeremy, if you don't mind. So
Sure.
I'm just going to crack on. So in the on the Academy website this week, I read your article on place-based. Just tell me a little bit more about what place-based is, and you've mentioned there about the WorkTech conference platform. What's happening with that business, and how are they coping at the moment?
Well, it's very tough. We had half a dozen conferences set up around the world in Auckland, Sydney, New York, Los Angeles, Tokyo, Copenhagen, and so on. Everything has been postponed to the autumn. And I think our sponsors and partners and delegates have been very good about it. It's a global pandemic. And so the WorkTech brand continues. We're just having to do stuff online at the moment, and the live events will come back, because we believe the blend between the virtual and the physical is very important. So the WorkTech business is like every other business, is having to adapt.
And do you think that as a result of this, that perhaps the WorkTech model might change its dimension in the future? Do you think it will become less place-based and more virtual?
Well, I think people value human face-to-face interaction. There's always an exhibition that sits alongside the WorkTech conference. People go to meet other people in the flesh, face-to-face. And that's a lot of the reason why people go to work, incidentally. So I don't think that's going to go away entirely. It's just going to change. I think there will be more emphasis in the WorkTech business on online resources in the future, as opposed to purely face-to-face. But we've been doing that for some time anyway, because we appreciate that not everybody can get to every live event. Yeah.
And which is, I suppose, part of the WorkTech Academy principle, isn't it? It's for the people that can't attend those events. You direct traffic to the virtual learning at part of the WorkTech Academy.
Absolutely. And often when there's something that is discussed at a live conference, you can then go into it in more depth. You can get other perspectives. You can provide background resources and so on and so forth. So I think in a way we're a kind of I wouldn't say exemplar, but we're a kind of microcosm of what most organizations are going to have to do is blend the face-to-face presenteeism of the office with virtual and remote working.
Absolutely. I think the whole concept of place-based, most organizations have a percentage of their people that are what we call place-based by virtue of their role, the nature of what they do. So there will always be a requirement to have a place. But I think the face or shape of that place will change as a result of where we're going through at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, place is going to change. We're already getting concepts like, Cushman and Wakefield. If you looked at Fast Company the last few days, they've got a project from Cushman and Wakefield looking at distancing people in the office, the 6-foot distance between people in open plan working. I think that's a bit incredulous, quite honestly, and not very practical. I think what we're going to see is not people all returning to the office and spacing them out physically. We're going to space them out temporally. We're going to have some people coming into the workplace on some days and some on others. There will be phased interaction with the physical workplace.
Yeah, it's a staggered approach.
Yeah.
Justin's come up with a question, and Justin, I will come to your question in a minute. Is it because it will become relevant later on in the session, if that's okay? So do hang around, and I will ask your question of Jeremy. But Jeremy, on a personal level, I mean, how have you dealt with the sudden change in work? Is it changed your day much, or not at all? And I suppose the academy and the organisation.
Well, I've been a home worker on and off for the last 30 odd years. So some things haven't changed. But I do travel a lot because I would go to a lot of WORKTECH conferences and other academic meetings and so on around the world. So being in one place, I've rather enjoyed. But I've developed my own way of dealing with working from home. I'm lucky I have an office, which you can see behind me, that I actually share with my partner. And I am set up for home working. But one of the most important things is to maintain boundaries or borders between home and work. And when you're in work mode, you need a different mentality from when you're doing stuff around the house. And trying to I'm not somebody who merges those two things.
Yeah. So when it comes to 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, whatever it may be, shut the laptop. You leave your office. That's work done.
Yeah, that's work done. And I wear different clothes. I know, without leaving the house. You might be amused that I've got a jacket and a shirt on, but actually it helps me mentally prepare for work as opposed to watching Netflix or doing the dishes.
Fabulous. So when you're in your season of whatever you watch on Netflix later on, you'll get changed into more casual attire, I assume.
Yes. I might remove my jacket.
Steady, sir, steady. Okay, so I think I mean we started to touch on this already, which is quite interesting. But some of our colleagues, industry counterparts, of course, that we work with on a day-to-day basis, have talked a lot about perhaps the office was dying. But I think has this not promoted the fact that we do actually need interactions and we need a place to go to? I mean, the church has been around for many years and will continue to, because it's a safe place. Do you not think this is the same thing?
I think the office is always being pronounced as dead. Every new bit of technology, the office is dead, the death of distance, and so on and so forth. This pandemic is an incredible challenge to place-based working. That we all travel into the center of cities in the morning and travel out in the evening. And I think the whole world has been put into a huge involuntary experiment around remote and flexible working. But I don't think offices are going to be dead. They've been changing and morphing for the last 20 years. Offices are actually social arenas. They're a social landscape. We go to be trained, to be mentored, to have meetings with other people, to feel part of a team or a tribe. And I think that's going to continue. I don't think the kind of panic we're seeing in the real estate industry at the moment is going to be borne out. I don't think the worst fears are going to be realized. I think what we're going to find is that people will return to office buildings in a phased, gradual way, and they'll use them in a different way. I still, to answer your question, will still have workplaces that are quite separate from home.
Yeah, I agree. And just, I will ask Justin's question now here because it is relevant. So Justin has popped a question onto the board here. And he says that YouGov survey published on Sky today claims only 9% of Britons want life to return to normal, whatever normal is, once lockdown is over. Any surprises with this figure?
No, I think there's tremendous dissatisfaction. If you look at the big tracking surveys of worker satisfaction globally, and disassociation from work and dissatisfaction levels have been quite high. People don't like the current economic model. It's very tough on life as opposed to work. It's out of balance. There are huge environmental consequences. Look how quiet our streets are and how clean our air is since the lockdown. So I'm not surprised at all. People don't want to go back to the old ways, but the idea that we're all going to become home workers overnight, and organizations are going to be able to maintain themselves on that model, that's one for the birds, quite frankly.
Yep, I agree. So I'm going to just quickly ask you this question here. So again, you know, our industry, we've been hell bent on maximizing, optimizing the office space. So of course, real estate and rents have just been appreciating asset. They've been going one way. And so of course, there's been a massive emphasis on us as designers, as gurus of the industry to maximize the space, you know, agile working or smart working, whatever you want to call it. But what do you think the future of that high density open plan looks like? Is it now dead? You know, what might it look like post?
Well, I think the trend over the last few years has been the socialization of work. So people have been put into spaces with much higher densities than ever before, on the basis, not you're saving our company money, but social animation and buzz and, you know, group ethos is really important. And I think there's going to be a retreat from that. I think that the idea of high density open plan, shared spaces, hot desking, all of those kinds of things, people are not going to want to sit down at a keyboard that's been used by somebody else. I think standards of hygiene and cleanliness and air quality are going to be addressed. People are not going to crowd into staff restaurants and socialized eating in very, very close proximity of other people. I think we're going to tentatively return to work, and there's going to be new social norms emerge. We don't yet know what those are, but I think it's quite clear that open plan, which, well, let's face it, has had a battering over the last couple of years because of noise and distraction, and is a big part of worker dissatisfaction. I think we're going to see more enclosure in the workplace. We're going to see, you know, and people watching this webinar will kind of shake their head, cellular offices with two people in them, because, you know, the pendulum is swinging, and this will give the pendulum a very big push.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's always resistance to that open plan working, as you just talked about, Jeremy, but noise, concentration, and now of course there's another big resistor here that people can throw into the mix and say, well, we don't want to work open plan because of that social space and social distancing. So, but of course that then I suppose falls very nicely into the next question. So clearly, what about co-working spaces, which have built their whole model on maximizing and sharing space?
Well, you know, the current fear that the co-working model will be broken, I think those fears are unfounded as well. But I think there'll be a shift in customer base in co-working. So co-working started as a social movement, you know, working alone together. Lots of freelancers and consultants and very small micro companies would go into a co-working space. And I think they're the ones that are really struggling economically in this climate. And I think they will probably, many of them, cancel their co-working subscription and work from home, because that's what they've had to do. They've had to adapt. So the smaller end of the co-working market will decline perhaps, but it will be more than compensated at the larger end of the market. Big corporates will think we're now in a world of hyper shocks, and, you know, what's the point in taking out long leases on big buildings? Why don't we have a flexible model where we rely more on co-working venues and other flex space service providers? And so I think you'll see the corporates coming more into the co-working spaces, replacing the lost revenue from the freelancers who've decided to work from home.
Yeah, I think as you said earlier on, we've been forced into this massive social experiment that people were fearful of previously. And about remote working, working away from the office. I don't want to say working from home necessarily, but working away from the office. So big corporates, of course, now it's proven to them that it will work. So I agree with you that all of a sudden there is a, excuse me, there is a case here that these co-working spaces could work for them. So but of course that's going to put pressure, therefore, then on landlords in other areas that their spaces now become less attractive because there are different environments that people can have within co-working spaces.
Well, I think we'll see a lot of very fast movement around landlords. They were already looking at a co-working offer. The BCO is just about to bring out a report that I was involved in with the architects AFK about how landlords can respond to co-working and the different strategies. And I think that'll accelerate because because landlords will team up with service providers. I think the corporate market will look very seriously at co-working in a way they never have before, because they have been forced into this large involuntary experiment in remote working.
Yeah, I think there will be landlords that will need to start to develop their space as tenant ready. So that whole model where people need to so as a consumer, as an occupier, the emphasis should therefore be on the landlord now. Perhaps if co-working is promoting it, landlords perhaps should do it so it becomes tenant ready. Which is a concept that I think is going to become more evident as we move forward.
Absolutely.
So we sort of touched on this already, but the sharing. I'll give you an example, which I thought at the time was very bizarre. But just before Christmas, I was in the Emirates. I was in Dubai and doing a project, and I've mentioned this to you, so I'll just quickly talk about it again. But the colleagues within that environment within Dubai would not share a glass, and everything had to be brand new. So it had to be paper cups or plastic cups. Where of course within the UK, we don't think twice about going to an office or going to a restaurant. We get a glass, we drink out of it. We wouldn't even question where that's come from. But in Dubai, it was very different. The culture there was, don't want to drink from that. We have no proof where that's been, who's cleansed it, the sanitization of it. I suppose that model's going to come here as well.
I think there are going to be different cultural traits in different markets. I think the Anglo-American workplace was pushed very, very hard, high density, socialized working. And we've taken things from other parts of the world, like the Agile Scrum, which originated in Japan around manufacturing, is now part of kind of office life and software development and other forms of kind of innovation development. And the idea of a scrum and sharing and passing things around and, a very collaborative, communal approach to work, that will be challenged by this pandemic. And all kinds of unforeseen consequences are going to come out of it. I mean, my hunch is actually this is going to do a lot for smart building technology, because if companies weren't serious about measuring their air quality before and indoor air particles, they're going to get serious about it now. So I would predict a lot of sensors going into buildings, big focus on air quality. Companies are going to get much stricter about densities in the same way when you climb on a bus, the driver gets an alert when the bus is full. I'm usually the guy standing outside trying to get on the bus. But offices are going to be, there are going to be alerts, to facilities managers. The building is full in terms of what we've decided is the maximum occupation. This floor is full. This meeting room has got too many people in it. And there's going to be a use of technology to monitor and really set out the basis for new social norms at work.
Yeah, I mean, BCO guidelines, of course, have changed over the years. Most people are now planning to 1 in 10, 1 in 8. Most buildings, of course, are designed to one person per 10 square meters. We could go back to the old days, as you say, where that then goes back up to 1 in 15, 1 in 20, perhaps. So I mean, who knows? But that's what we're predicting in what you're saying there, is that we won't want to share those spaces. The good old days of silos and offices may come back.
Yeah. Well, I think I don't want to sound retrogressive, because I think, yes, it will come back. Some of those things, we'll see cellular offices. I've seen some service providers now looking to rent residential apartments and turn them into small offices for 3 or 4 people and offer them to big corporates. That's a very interesting development. So I think people are going to think very, very cleverly. And if you're an office designer or a space planner, you've rushed in one direction towards the social landscape, a range of settings, activity-based working. You get less personal space, but you get a range of settings that you can go and sit in.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that all of a sudden sounds a lot less attractive in the post-COVID-19 environment, where people want more personal space. So
exactly.
People are going to have to kind of recalibrate their creative thinking in organizations like yours, for example. And we're already seeing evidence of that.
I mean, that's again leads very nicely onto this question. I mean, I can hear myself saying it. You know, whenever I meet a client.
Yeah. Well, this is my point. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. We talk about not my space. We talk about our space. So the whole activity-based work, of course, is designed around the concept of sharing and caring. And this is now our space rather than my space. But as I talk about here, my question to you here. So every office that we've designed over the last sort of 10 years, of course, have these hubs, these scrum spaces, another high table within a tea point. You know, every design has one. A little bit, perhaps, it's been around the block a little bit, but they have them. But they're now going to become redundant, surely, post-COVID.
I'm not sure they're going to become redundant. People are still going to want to collaborate. People are still going to want to break out. People are going to have a rest in a soft seat area. I just think how they're used is, initially at least, they're going to be used a lot more sparingly. So I think people will still provide these spaces, but they'll also provide spaces for personal escape, personal reflection. People will be much more conscious of their own self and their own safety, at least in the short term, and possibly it'll have a knock-on effect in the medium and longer term. So I think these space planning devices will have to be kind of reconsidered in how we use them.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. We've talked about it already, but I mean, sustainability and well-being, of course, was the topic of conversation pre the pandemic, and it was becoming very ingrained in people's thinking. And there was a big movement on well-being as it was anyway before COVID-19. But now, as we've already touched on, it'd be good to deep dive into this a little bit. I mean, there's going to be a real pressure and push, isn't there, on landlords, occupiers, tenants to really think about the spaces, how they're considered in terms of sanitization, air quality, that whole well-being piece.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting unforeseen consequence of what's happened. We just published yesterday on the WORKTECH Academy platform a big piece from China, from the China Green Building Council, in which they presented evidence that one of the reasons why China has managed to get the pandemic under some control, apart from the fact that they have a much more loose relationship with civil liberties than we do in the West, but one of the big reasons is that they have invested very heavily in green buildings and in sustainability. And the new generation of buildings in a lot of these new cities in China, including Wuhan, are very big on things like measuring indoor air quality, cleaning, maintenance, hygiene, spatial barriers, the orderly organization of people flowing in and out of buildings. And this was all done in order to get green buildings certification, with a lot of stuff about well-being and biophilia and escape spaces. But this actually has worked extremely in the favor of controlling infectious disease. So there is a link between green buildings and what you need to do in a post-COVID-19 world. So well-being, already a big issue, that is going to accelerate even more, not just physical well-being, but also mental well-being, and the third dimension, which is digital well-being, people suffering from technology addiction, which is a danger while we're all stuck at home with screens. So I think this will only accelerate.
And I'm going to bring in Cassiana's question here. Good morning, Cassiana. And which is relevant to what we're talking about. How do you think people or businesses will react? Because people perhaps won't want to go back to the old ways.
Well, yes, it's impossible to predict whether people are just going to go back to the old ways. As soon as we're let out, as it were, we're all going to jump back on the trains and in our cars, and we're going to go to the workplace and congregate and behave pretty much like we did before. That question plays right to the heart of the proposition you set up at the beginning of this webinar, which was, when you bend a system so radically out of shape, it never bends back into exactly the same shape. So what are the things that are different? And I think that we're still going to have office buildings. We're still going to have many of the recognizable features of working life. But for instance, in leadership, people having had to lead virtual teams, I think will have a massive impact on the way managers organize themselves and lead teams. It's going to have a massive impact on how people are appraised and measured. It's not going to be about turning up. It's going to be about outputs and about results against objectives. And in a sense, everybody, whether junior or senior, have had to work autonomously. So the idea of having a low autonomy job, I know there are lots of low autonomy jobs, but in the kind of, white collar, if you like, to use an old expression, office world, everyone's now got a high autonomy job because there's nowhere to go to have a low autonomy job. So, these kinds of things are going to change. I think the world of HR is going to change dramatically.
Yeah, this has become a disruptor in what we do.
Yeah.
I think there's a question here. I'll ask those actually at the end. Yeah. So this well, you've just answered the question. So the kinks to the left, of course, is the fact that perhaps we won't want to go back to normality. Do you think? There's a question here that that Ruth has asked. Is that, do you see, as a result of this, perhaps that we'll have smaller hubs popping up for corporates further out of town? So London becomes a drop-in space, if you like, for meetings, catch-ups, VCs, client-facing meetings. But then we have other hubs. I suppose the hub and spoke model, isn't it? I think, as we would refer to it. So we have a base in town, and outside of that, there's lots of distributed little offices. Do you think that might come into play?
I think that's a very good prediction. I think we will see smaller units of working. To my earlier point about service providers looking at renting, taking long leases on residential property to create 2- and 3-person offices in certain city centres. I think that's an option. I think that the whole approach to place is going to alter, and with it, the way that workplaces are currently devised at the moment, place is the dominant factor, and the function of facilities management is operated in its own silo. So you tend to have FM, and then you have IT providing the tools, the digital tools, and then you have HR with the policies and practices. And for most of the last 100 years, each profession has developed, but in a silo. And I think what the legacy of COVID might be is that these silos get abandoned, and organizations have to think much more holistically, not just about place as the primary thing, but about the relationship between place, technology, and people, so that you've got HR, FM, and IT all working together. as one workplace management service, a kind of unified service, if you like. So I think we're in for some interesting reconfigurations of the corporate structure in order to deal with this new reality.
Okay, perfect. I've just had some messages come in there that we pause for a second there. So I'm just going to quickly ask, I'll just do my poll again and just make sure that we can be heard, if you don't mind, Jeremy. So if you could just let us know for the people that are still with us, which is still quite a few, so thank you for hanging around, if you can still hear us. And good, I think we had a moment there where we were paused, but the majority of you can hear us, which is fabulous. Thank you very much indeed. Perfect. Okay, so let's continue. And I think this plays very nicely then into the next question. So, how many employers do you think will need to rethink the way they go about their flexibility policies, remote working, working from different environments? What's going to happen there?
I think most employers who are in what is more broadly called the knowledge economy are going to have to rethink their flexibility policies. Some companies have been dragged kicking and screaming into the world of flexible and remote world. They've been dragged kicking and screaming into the world of remote work just in the last month. And they're probably regretting not being more wholehearted in exploring flexible options earlier, because nobody likes having it done to them. Most companies like to roll out their own policies in their own time. Those companies which are very far ahead in terms of remote and flexible working, they are companies that are way down the path of digital transformation. These are digital companies. Somebody said to me recently, you're either a digital predator or you're digital prey. And if you're still talking about going digital, then you're 3 years out of date. So I think everyone's going to have to rethink.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to become a key driver in people perhaps choosing their new workplace, the next workplace, isn't it? Is what is your flexibility policy? Are you place-based or not place-based? I think what this pandemic has proven is that unless you are a manufacturer of goods and you are actually there in that space making it, there are lots of, I think, managers, businesses that thought they couldn't work remotely, but they have now had their hands forced, proven that they can work remotely. And I think they'll be forced to think about this to retain their employee workers, their work people.
Well, there's some work that lends itself to remote and flexible working. Research is one of those. But if you take another aspect of my job at the Royal College of Art, where I'm the Helen Hammond Chair of Design, students go to the Royal College of Art to paint in a studio and be supervised in that, and to make furniture in a workshop. They go to the Royal College of Art to make clothes, to have a runway fashion show. And if your workshops and your studios are closed, if you're teaching that type of craft skill, if you like, then your whole raison d'etre is taken away. So there are some things that place-based working cannot replace. You cannot replace that being in a studio or a workshop. Knowledge work, where you're dealing with data and information, that can be organized more flexibly. So it just depends on the type of organization and the type of work.
Yeah, I think what this will do, in my opinion, is it will force autonomy and allowing people to be more autonomous. But I agree with what you're talking about. We want experiences, and that experience comes being in a place, meeting people, meeting colleagues, bouncing ideas off of one another, and not living your life by somebody's diary. And of course, what we're having to do now is you're fixing time to speak to somebody, whereas in an office or in a place, and I can say, "Hey, Jeremy, have you got 2 minutes?" All of those interactions. So, I mean, so from a workplace perspective, what are we going to learn from this? What's if you could say a couple or one? What's the biggest takeaway?
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that what people are discovering is that human health is more important than anything else.
Mm.
And especially in the Anglo-American workplace, less so in Europe, where they probably, and Scandinavia, where they've probably got healthier habits. We've been strapped to the economic wheel, like, you know, in an incredibly tough way, you know, and as the economic wheel moves, so the system works. But people are sacrificing a lot in terms of their health and their well-being and air quality and seeing their families and so on. And people are realizing in this lockdown that there's more to life than work. And people are beginning to express themselves in new ways and self-identify in ways which are beyond the job and the work. And we've had this model of economic growth and all our livelihoods are attached to it. And I think there's going to be a lot of soul searching, and that's the one thing I'd take out. Let's ask some fundamental questions about our economic system. How can it be that millions and millions of people are one paycheck from you know, not having enough money for food? That can't be right. And we need some new solutions.
Yeah, I totally agree. I totally agree. But one of the things, I've got some good questions coming in here, which I'll ask you at the moment. But this is my last question I've got in my deck is, are we going to forget? I mean, give it, you know, it's a nightmare, right? Human race, it's human nature is that give it a short period of time. Are we just not going to go back to where we were?
Well, I think what's going to happen is that we're going to not make as big a change initially as we thought we might when we're all in the lockdown. So we're going to go back and things are going to reflex and things are going to carry on in a sort of normal. But down the line, in the medium term, that's when the big changes are going to happen and when there's going to be some of the soul searching will be turned into practical change. I can't see the airlines having the schedules that they currently have now. That's just one example.
Well, so I read yesterday with interest that EasyJet are thinking about every middle seat, of course, now will not be bookable. Social distancing will need to come into play. So across all industries, all sectors. Okay. So I'm going to ask you some questions here now from the audience, and I thank everybody again for hanging around. So let's have a look. So I've got a question here from Richard. It says, will money shortages not mean there will be a requirement to use compact working space to be able to maintain staff levels as funding is likely to be tight after the pandemic? Or will they just work on shift patterns or perhaps extend working hours?
That's a very good question. I don't think people are going to be able to condense space because they're going to have to spread people out. So I think time is going to be the thing. I think we'll go to buildings will go to 24-hour working, and people will come in phased waves of people coming into office buildings, in the same way that some cities, you know, keep cars out. You can, you know, depending on the letter which starts your number plate, you know, Tuesday and Thursdays, A to M can come into the city. You know, the weekend, other cars can come into the city. So I think people will use buildings in different ways. Condensing space is a good idea if you're going to have less contact with the workplace and more home working. But condensing space and having everybody coming in moves against the social distancing. So there's a lot of contradictions that have to be worked out there.
And you're quite right. And that leads me on to the next question here from Deji. Forgive me if I pronounced it incorrectly. Which is, so perhaps there'll be more focus on cleaning levels and hygiene in the long run rather than a significant change in space and utilization. Our thoughts?
Yes, I think that's a pretty sound proposition. I think hygiene, air quality, people knowing how many colleagues are in the building, not overcrowding. I think that, as I said earlier, the use of smart technology and sensors to actually measure exactly how a building is being occupied and what the performance levels are, that is going to accelerate enormously now.
Yeah, but I think it's and I agree with you. The information, of course, the technology exists that is there now already, and we're starting to see that emerging as a market through what we do. But I think as a user, we would want access to it. And I think there's a nervousness at the moment if you are a building occupier, building owner, and landlord, is how much information do you let filter through to your user group, because then it becomes an HR problem for a user group.
Yeah, I mean, how much data is shared with the user population of building is very, very important. I think some smart building systems will be predictive and do things automatically without human intervention. They'll lower heating levels when there's a lot of people moving about and so on and so forth, or they'll look at light levels hitting the facade of the building, and all kinds of interesting computational solutions are going to arise. But we're going to have an emphasis on hygiene, on comfort, on personal space, and that's inevitable. But it doesn't make office buildings redundant. It makes them want to become more smart.
Okay, perfect. I mean, there's loads of questions coming in. We're not going to get through them all, but do keep them coming in. So I've got one from Martin here.
I'll make my answers shorter.
You carry on. It's we're getting some good feedback here. So Martin says, morning, really enjoying the discussion. Thank you, Martin. Thanks to both of us. Find it interesting how the way we are working at the moment has allowed glimpses into personal life living alongside working life. Children playing in the background of conference calls, etc. Could this have a long-term impact on how personal life is viewed at work, moving away from it being a hidden side of life in our workplaces?
That's a really interesting subject. I saw a study many years ago where the researcher had asked people to send two photographs, one of their kitchen at home and one of their workplace. And most of the workplaces were indistinguishable. They're all the same. There was the suspended ceiling and the dying potted plant and the filing cabinet and the desktop. But the kitchens were all different. Some were Bavarian, some were Bauhaus. It was amazing. And of course, people are their real selves when they get home. And then they get into this kind of plastic, artificial, generic environment at work. And I think seeing a glimpse of everybody's homes makes us think that we need to personalize the workplace a lot more. That's difficult to do, but I think there's going to be more texture, more color. I've enjoyed watching all the newsreaders, saying, "Oh, gosh, that's what Robert Peston's study looks like."
Yeah, exactly.
It's quite good fun.
Yeah, and I think it also proves that we are real people. So we have a work facade and we have a home facade. And sometimes they're very separate. But of course, we've got homes. We've got, as I can see your study, you can see my study here as well. So we'll have a personal life as well. So it'd be good to bring that in. I agree with what Martin's saying there. I mean, just a question from me, actually, while I think about it. Across most of Europe, of course, a lot of businesses or a lot of the demographic have workers' councils. Do you think that this could be the birth of the Workers' Council within the UK, or the starting of having workers' councils?
I'd love to see that case, because if you look at some of the best office design around the world, they share one common denominator. So if you look at Dutch design in the 70s, with Herman Hertzberger, if you look at Swedish design, Niels Thorpe and SAS in the 1980s, if you look at Germany with Bürolandschaft in the 60s and 70s again, they all responded to worker councils, and the user voice was incredibly important in determining the conditions of how office design would be delivered. Mm-hmm. And what we've lacked in this country in recent years, it's very unbalanced. You can look at the economic workplace as the relationship between labor and capital. Capital has had all the cards and has called all the shots. And we need to listen to labor. We need to listen to the talent more. and workers' councils could be a way of doing that. So I, for many years, have been a strong advocate of workers' councils. It has fallen, I have to say, on stony ground up to now.
Well, you've heard it here, team. So Jeremy is pioneering that. So I'm going to ask our last question here, as we are now running out of time, and it comes from Toby. Toby asks, how do lifts work with social distancing? Will we see the death of the skyscraper?
That's a really interesting question. Again, I think there will be, in the short term, there will be rules around how many people can go in a lift, how many people will want to go in a lift. I don't think tall buildings are going to go away. I just think how we use them is going to be different. Already, they're trying to think about how you create communities in vertical skyscrapers, and they're talking about vertical communities, and there's been a lot of very good architectural thinking around this. So I don't think tall buildings are going to go away, for the simple reason that they grew in the first place, in that certain points of the city centre is prime real estate, and so of course you build up, and that's been happening for 150 years. I think they're going to be used differently, and maybe we'll see the return of, for those of you who have seen The Apartment, the great film, Billy Wilder, 1960, Shirley MacLaine as the lift attendant. Maybe the Shirley MacLaines will come back and attend to our lifts.
Okay, we can only hope. We can only hope.
Yeah.
Jeremy, I think what we'll do is we'll bring it to a close there, because it's coming very nicely to our time. Remind our viewers, listeners, where they can find out more about WORKTECH Academy. Yeah,
www.worktechacademy.com. Do have a look at our platform, and we'd love to hear from you. And do have a look at the Royal College of Art, Helen Hamlin Centre for Design as well, human-centered design. Of course, it's very, very important that we have a human-centric approach to how we develop workplaces in the future.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's been very insightful. And so everybody else, thank you very much. If you have any questions that we haven't answered, if you wanted to post them to us, please do. Jeremy and I, of course, will be more than happy to come back to you with any thoughts, the ongoing conversation. And this will be replayable on the website very shortly. But I'd like to thank you all for joining us and being here this morning. Once again, Jeremy, thank you very much indeed. We'll bid you farewell. Have a lovely weekend, and I'll be back next week for another session. But thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.